Hello again, this is Father Larry Young. This is the third video in my series on drug and alcohol abuse. Last time I argued from the standpoint of reason that reality is far better than this counterfeit reality induced by being high or drunk. Now I want to open out our vision of reality to embrace the spiritual realm. So let's start with some questions. Is there a spiritual realm? Does the human soul exist? Is there a God? The physical universe is stranger than fiction. Talk to any scientist, a biologist, physicist, or astronomer. As we learn more and more about the material universe, we find out space and time aren't even fixed things anymore. Space-time can dilate and compress. Is it that far-fetched to imagine an immaterial dimension of existence that's outside time and space? How do we explain human self-consciousness if human beings are simply reducible to matter alone? How can matter become self-aware? How can matter bend back upon itself and perceive its own existence? This operation requires a spiritual faculty. When human beings communicate, we don't just spit out memorized words for individual things. That's something that we're able to teach a primate. But what a primate can simply not do, that a human being starts doing at the age of 2 years old, is forming grammatical sentences. This is because we have a spiritual faculty, a human soul capable of thinking abstractly. And I'll just throw this in there for what it's worth. All the data accrued by many reputable studies of near-death experience corroborate the existence of a human soul. Let's turn to the existence of God now, starting with the fact that science cannot disprove God's existence. As a matter of fact, many scientific discoveries seem to be pointing more and more to the existence of God. For instance, now we know from science that the universe had a beginning. Well, how can being come from nothing? We have to deal with this problem of causality. It is inescapable. Even if you posit there's many universes, there's a multiverse, you're just pushing the beginning and the problem of causality further back. You still have to deal with it. Dr. Robert Jastrow was an astronomer who died in 2008. He was a professor of geophysics at Columbia University and spent most of his career working for NASA, including in 1961 being the founding director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. He was a sincere scientist and seeker of the truth, and he said this: "Astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner, because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover, that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact." Science starts getting really strange when you get into the world of quantum mechanics. Now we're talking about this subatomic realm of little tiny particles and waves and quarks and vibrating strings or whatever the heck. Makes you start to wonder, what's holding the physical universe together in this sea of subatomic particles? Well, it seems more and more plausible when you think about it, that there is a supreme personal consciousness behind the physical universe, holding it together and giving individual things their composition and form. "He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Empirical science, mathematics, philosophy, theology, they should all become friends because they are all different methods of inquiry into the one reality. They're going in the same direction ultimately and will end up at the same destination. Those who limit themselves to the scientific method, to empirical science alone, and who aren't open to the possibility of anything outside a purely material universe. They are setting themselves up for embarrassment and really handicapping themselves in their potential to grasp the full scope of reality using all the methods of inquiry that we have at our disposal. According to Dr. Robert Jastrow, again, he says in his book, God and the Astronomers, the following: "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." It is utterly reasonable to believe in a spiritual realm and in the human soul and in a supernatural, immaterial, conscious, personal, supreme being who is governing all of reality. Is it not also possible for us to reach out with our spirit towards this supreme being that is the source of our very own being and existence? Is it not also possible for this supreme being to reach down to us, seek to communicate with us, to speak to us in ways and modes of expression that we understand, to the extent of even becoming one of us to draw close to us? The Son of God, when he walked this earth, told us, "Seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you." Maybe you feel like you don't have any faith. Are you at least open to the possibility that a spiritual realm exists? Even if you're just suspicious that this might be true, try opening up your soul and reaching out to your Creator. If we find that there's some resistance in our heart to the act of faith, that somehow we're just unwilling to believe, then perhaps we can just take it back a step and make a really small beginning and try praying for the willingness to believe. If that's still too much, then pray for the willingness to become willing to believe. However far we have to take it back, if we make some small beginning, we can be guaranteed of one thing. Scripture says, God draws close to those who draw close to Him. The important thing is that we're honest, and God will take us where we're at. Those who discover the spiritual realm for themselves finally feel like their soul is eating real food and not filling up on this cotton candy of drugs and alcohol, but rather on something that is truly satisfying and nourishing for their soul. So folks, what I'd like to do for you now is read 3 testimonials of folks who were regular drug and alcohol users for recreational purposes for years and who eventually discarded them when they discovered the spiritual life. Here goes. Lacking a strong spiritual formation led to bad habits in my life. Through my own desires for misguided adventures and fun, I eventually came to a point where I became a habitual user of drugs and alcohol. Getting high provided me with a way to avoid the harsh realities of life and what might be called carrying the cross, while distracting me from what it was taking from me all along: my energy, my money, my time, and healthy personal relationships. It was difficult to see as it was happening because it unfolded slowly over time. But my yearning for something meaningful in my life never went away. And now I know it was never going to go away, since I was made to know and to love God. And that fulfillment in my life is found in my willingness to struggle for His kingdom. Through God's grace, I now see that the distraction of drugs and alcohol is a counterfeit to the spiritual life. After my conversion, I noticed that prayer and worship uplifted my spirit, rather than leaving it in the inevitable stupor of drugs and alcohol. That rather than becoming easily irritable, I felt internally strong and healthy in a way that allowed me to give more time and energy to my loved ones and those around me. Here's another one. I got a long history of using. I was 12 when I first smoked pot and drank enough beer to get drunk. At an early age, it was normal to get buzzed. My older brothers and my friends' older brothers and sisters were all doing it. As a kid, I worked hard raking leaves, cutting grass, and delivering newspapers. Played sports extremely competitively, and I partied hardy. It was fun. But even at a young age, I felt like I was doing something wrong, but cool. The cool and fun part outweighed whether or not it was right or wrong in God's eyes. I thought God was not happy with me, so why bother going to church? All the way through college, I would carry this attitude. I wasn't a bad person, but was not following the way of God. After 25 years, my fun and being cool led to full-blown addiction. What would I do now? Now that I've dogged God for 25 years, He's not going to help me. Why would He? I had to choose life or death. Eventually, I turned my eyes to my higher power, and there I found that God loved me more than I could possibly imagine, and He was waiting for me. It's like a kid who dogs his mother, but the mother never gives up on her child. The love I began to understand was mind-boggling, and the peace I began to feel was 1,000 times better compared to all the drugs and alcohol I had consumed. The peace that came from God is what stands out more than anything. There is no peace without God. I was searching for it in drugs and alcohol for 25 plus years, and all the time it was right in front of me. It's like it says in the words of the song Amazing Grace. Why would He help a wretched fool like me? I was so blind, but now I was able to see. He loved me unceasingly and helped me realize that there's a better way to live. I was free and at peace with a sense of serenity I never thought I would know. Here's one final testimonial. I consider my story much like most youth today. I was a pretty regular high school kid. I liked playing video games, sports, and doing mildly wild things with friends. A long story short, I began smoking marijuana fairly regularly after high school. It was fun at first. I saw it as a way to hang out with friends and unwind. However, over time, I began to realize how empty it really was. I was chasing this feeling that only seemed to fade away into smoke as soon as I had it. Later on, I had a conversion, and I began to enter into the life of prayer. I began attending daily mass, praying every day, going to spiritual direction, the whole bit. The spiritual life is one that I immediately began to realize was much deeper than any of the fleeting pleasures of the world. As I was entering into the spiritual life, I felt like I was gazing at a large mountain. From a distance, it looked imposing, challenging, but at the same time, majestic and worthwhile. As I began the journey, I began to drink from this well of the spiritual life, and noticed that it was not something that ever faded. My joy remained. And even though I wasn't always brimming over with some sentimental or physical pleasure, this joy has really stuck with me and continues to be my strength as I continue my journey up this mountain. I've come to see that even though I've not gone too far, it's well worth it. Much like when you reach a clearing on a hike and you get to see the beauty of God's creation. The further we go on this adventure into reality in all its mysterious fullness, including the spiritual realm, the less and less we'll desire this mirage or counterfeit reality of using drugs and alcohol. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy the person who takes refuge in Him. In the next video in this series, I want to talk about drug and alcohol abuse and how it relates to human suffering and the cross. God bless you.